All right, I think it's go time. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to CAHL's Virtual Series 2020. My name is Sachin Gangupantula. I'm the co-chair of CAHL's Virtual Series, helping us bring these events together for our members. This is our fifth event of the series and our first Learning from Leaders session. Since launching this series, we've had a great response and appreciation from our members of the topics and the discussions we've had so far. Of course, it does take a lot of planning and coordination, and I would like to thank Navi, Sarah, and the entire planning committee to help us get here. And we have a few more events coming up. We do continue to bring our best practices and thought leadership from all the leaders across the state. I'd like to kick off with a few housekeeping items. Let's see here. This event does have an opportunity for you to claim 1.5 qualified education credits through ACHE. Please make sure to self-report them through the ACHE portal so you can get the credits. We will be sending a post-event survey to get your feedback on the event. We appreciate all of your time in completing that feedback. It helps us in our programming for the future and also understand your priorities so that we can select the appropriate topics for you. Our chat is open all through the session, monitored by our dedicated planning committee members. So please submit your questions along the way for the host so we can make sure they are addressed at the appropriate time. We would like to review some of the upcoming virtual events as part of this series. The next event is our annual award ceremony. Please do register for that. We get to virtually celebrate our healthcare heroes and all the accomplishments of our leaders as well as volunteers who have made a difference in the past 1 year. Registration is complimentary and you'll have a chance to network with all of our healthcare leaders across California. We would like to thank our sponsors, the Platinum sponsors, for their ongoing support in bringing these events to you in this virtual environment. Can you move on to the next slide, please? All right, looks like we meet the sponsors here. Our sponsors include, let's see. Looks like we missed a slide here. 1 second. University of Phoenix, we have UCSF, and our I apologize for the delay here. UCSF, Gurnick Academy, University of Phoenix, and IA Healthcare. Thank you very much for your ongoing support for us. I would like to touch on or welcome Michael Felder to our session today. Thank you so much for joining us today. We would like to have his leadership experiences and the challenges as he goes through as a CEO of the GA Correctional Healthcare Services. As you can imagine, the healthcare delivery in this pandemic takes on a bigger challenge when you consider the prison health community that we have. So we look forward to having a discussion from this session through Michael and learn to understand some of the challenges that we can apply or take away to apply in our own organizations. So at this time, I'd like to hand over the moderation to Navpreet Atwal, who will moderate the discussion tonight. Navpreet Atwal is a project manager with Kaiser Permanente in OneLink and Finance Technology, KB Finance. Navi is a current graduate student at NYU and a graduate from CSU Chico with a double major in Health Services Administration and Spanish Language Studies. Navi is a member of the American College of Health Care Executives. In her spare time, she enjoys gardening, taking on DIY projects, and spending time outdoors with her family and friends. Of course, she's always had the time to be the champion behind our ongoing virtual series. As a co-chair, she's been there right from the beginning in helping us plan and bring this event to you. Thank you so much for both of you to be part of this. Off to you, Navi.
Thank you, Sachin, and welcome everyone. On behalf of CAHL, I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to share that tonight's event is really not an event. It's a discussion with Michael and myself. So we'd like to hear from you. So if you have any questions and if you have any comments, please feel free, as Sachin said, to drop them in the chat. We have Corinne, Amy, and Shalisha on board who will be monitoring the chat and sending your questions over to be asked during the session. We also want you to have fun and enjoy the discussion. So sit back, relax, and maybe grab your favorite drink and enjoy the discussion. Lastly, I want to mention that we'll be changing things up a little bit. At some point, we'll be sharing our slides. Sometimes it'll be video only, just to keep a little bit of fun going. So I recommend that you are in presenter or speaker view to enjoy the best experience. So I think I've talked a lot. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Michael, who is the CEO of Kern Valley State Prison, overseeing healthcare delivery within Level 4 maximum security prison for 3,600 inmates and patients. Michael joined the California Correctional Healthcare Services in May 2015, and he brings with him 25 years of experience in large, complex organizations, both on the public and private sector. Michael served in the United States Air Force as a senior healthcare administrator, and he is a retired colonel. Michael is an active member of the American College of Healthcare Executives and serves on many other professional organizations. So Michael, thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for your service. On behalf of CAHL, I thank you for your time, and I am delighted to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Navi. I am so excited to be here this afternoon, and I want to thank all the members at CAHL for allowing me to present this afternoon, and especially thank you, Navi, because I've been working with you now for a couple of months and preparing for this. There couldn't have been a better individual and a better team to help prepare for this event tonight, so I want to publicly say thank you. You've been an excellent moderator in getting us to this point. I think that public acknowledgement is certainly well-deserved, so you've done a great job. Yeah, I've done a few different things. I want to do a quick disclosure here. I'm the CEO of Kern Valley State Prison, but just to be kind of a disclosure of, I'm not the official spokesperson for the department. And I want to make sure that's clear to everyone on the call here. This is a learning from leaders session. It's meant to be interactive and to have a discussion. And it's an opportunity to engage in discussions, and perhaps a typical kind of healthcare delivery system. So next slide.
So Michael, a lot of our learning from leader sessions with CAHL is, learning about the leader. So we'd like to hear a little bit about you. What are your interests, where you grew up, and maybe share with us what you like to do for fun.
Okay, well, you just asked a short question that probably deserves a long answer, but I'll be really brief here. So I'm originally from LA, and so since we're on a kind of a mute mode, if folks want to chime in and send in their comments to how many people are from LA, that would be great. I'd love to know who else is from LA. However, my LA is probably a little different than your LA. Your LA, you might be thinking of Los Angeles. I'm from Lower Alabama, and I grew up down in Mobile, Alabama, went to college down there, and started working, literally probably breaking child labor laws at a very early age, working with my uncle, clearing fields in deep South Alabama, setting up for his business, which was later to be tremendously successful. Continued to work during summers in between high school, paid my way through college, and ended up finishing in college, getting my, okay. This is what you do when you have a contingency plan. My camera fell, so I went to camera 2.
Great planning, Michael.
That's how that works, okay? Finished up college, got my commission, United States Air Force, served 10 years active duty, separated on August 31st, 2001 from active duty, and I'll talk a little bit about that because August 31st, 2001 was 11 days before 9/11. And a little story that goes along with that kind of sounds like this. And somebody had caught me at some time briefly after that and said, I bet you're really glad that you're really lucky. You got off of active duty just in time. And I immediately went into the reserves on September 1st, 2001. And I said, well, what do you really mean by that? This was, wow, well, you're not on active duty. So, everything kind of went to full scale prep for war. I said, I don't really think of it that way, but I understand how some people might have that perspective. I said, but that really wasn't my perspective. I was thinking something completely opposite, and that's okay. So spent 10 years active duty, separated in 01, entered the civilian workforce, and then did a dual track career, managing both my military and civilian career simultaneously. Retired in 2016 as a lieutenant colonel. Spent 26 great years in the Air Force, loved it, had a lot of fun, met a lot of great people, made a lot of great relationships along the way. I think you asked about some fun things, Navi. I used to fly, I don't anymore. I got my multi-engine rating some time ago. Did some martial arts a few years ago, had a lot of fun with that. Again, making great relationships and friendships along the way. My interests, kind of high level, I don't know how this kind of worked out this way, but family, faith, fitness, flying, and fun. And I say fun because we're in a serious industry, and what we do impacts lives. But that doesn't mean we cannot interject and have fun along the way. But folks who work closely with me will know I take my role in my work seriously. I think what we do is serious work, irrespective if you're in a correctional healthcare environment. It's really any healthcare environment, especially when you get into a leadership role or any other role within healthcare becomes critical.
So Michael, thank you for sharing that little bit of background about you. I know in our preparation sessions, we talked a lot about, the importance of self-care for optimal performance. Can you share with us what your day-to-day looks like? What are your daily routines? Yes, I can. And I guess I could say I'm rigidly flexible around this, but which means I try to keep to this kind of routine. Of course, with COVID, that's disrupted everybody's lives. So one thing I want to share is, and I want to kind of approach this from my work life and how I prepare for that. And I'm, constantly looking forward. What does tomorrow look like next week, the next quarter, the next year? And so what do we need to be thinking about and doing as we prepare for that moving forward? And I think that's critical in any role, actually. And I find it really helps me so that when I do walk into a meeting, that I'm not walking in and seeing the topics or thinking about this for the first time. And so I try my best to prepare for anything that's coming up in the future. And a lot of times that's, okay, what do I have for the next day? But I do take that time also to sit back and look, because you gotta project out what's out there the next quarter, the next year, and you got to think about the industry as a whole. Yeah, Michael, go ahead. I think preparation is key to success. Even just, taking some time on a Sunday evening to look at what are your meetings that are coming up? Have you done the prep work? Is there anything else that you need to do to prepare for that? Right now, I think a lot of us are facing a lot of chaos in life. So sometimes that just Sunday night cup of tea time could be beneficial to relax the mind so you're not jumping into the week unknowingly. But share with us a little bit more.
Yeah, Navi, I'll have to admit and confess, I usually don't have a cup of tea on Sunday night. It's usually a drink of choice. We won't really talk about what that may be, but it's not tea. So I want to go back to the prior slide. You don't need to go back to the prior slide. I have two wonderful kids, and I kind of glazed over that and didn't mention it. I got a 19-year-old son, and he's in college up in Sacramento, and doing the virtual thing, and so is my daughter, 14, freshman in high school. doing the virtual thing. Really, really tough for you know, the high schoolers and elementary school kids to be doing that online, but they're knocking it out. But my son, you know, I keep, you know, kind of upping the ante with the expectation. My son, you know, I only made 1 B in college. And he goes, Dad, I said, yeah, I've got high expectations of you. Now I'm going to let that simmer with the rest of the audience, so let's keep going. I'll let you think about that and cogitate on it. Be present. Be present. How many of us go into meetings and somebody's doodling on their laptop or doodling on their cell phone? Okay, it's happened. It happens everywhere. And what I would encourage you to do, all of us to do, is to really resist the urge to do that. It's distracting to the folks, you know, leading the meeting. It's distracting to other people. And being present in that moment with the team members and engaging with it is really part of being part of that team and helping folks drive, you know, discuss the issue at hand to come to a solution.
Yeah, so Michael, tell us, how do you resist that urge? You know, we're surrounded by technology today,
Sure.
and we're dependent on technology today even more than before. So how do you, as a CEO, resist the urge to look down on your phone and maybe answer 5 emails in that meeting?
I've kind of built in a habit, and I will say that you know, I do my best to follow this, and I think I do a fairly good job. This is no way meant to say that this is perfect in any way, but I put my phone face down a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And the reason I do that is that I figured if it's really super urgent, they'll call me. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, we all are in healthcare, and we all get a lot of emails and texts and stuff. So, but if it's super urgent, I'm thinking they'll call me. And so mm-hmm. Now, does that, Navi, I'm going to confess, does that mean I never look at my phone? No, it doesn't mean that, because sometimes I actually have something urgent I'm anticipating that I need to respond mm-hmm. to. So, but I do try to model the way and not do that. And sometimes I will go into a meeting and say, team, just so you know, I'm expecting a phone call. I may have to step out. So I'm preparing them to message that may happen.
And then sometimes, you know, even if the presenter knows that up front, it can be, you know, it doesn't come off as rude that you're not paying attention to whatever discussion or presentation is happening in the room. Although I think our virtual settings make it very difficult today because our virtual rooms are so large.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So, Michael, I want to transition a little bit and talk a little bit about the CA prison system. For a lot of us on the line, and for me in particular, I'm really not familiar with the system. So can you walk us through the structure of the organization?
Yeah, sure. So the takeaway that I really wanted to message on this particular representation here is the fact that our org structure at the institutional level is each prison is run by a chief executive officer for healthcare and the warden, and we work together to really accomplish the mission, okay? Because the mission of custody, in the sense of safety and security of staff and other inmate patients, the CEO's charter is really to delivering healthcare within that institution. So I work really closely with our warden. In fact, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so every prison has this similar structure here. Then we've got, you know, a secretary of CDCR who also has a peer equivalent, if you would, of a federal receiver, which the healthcare comes under them. But I'm not going to go too much further into how we're organized, other than the fact that we have a CEO and a warden that runs the institution, and I have all the healthcare piece, and the warden has all the custody folks with safety and security. And I put some numbers down on the lower right.
So, Michael, it must require close coordination and constant communication and a good foundational relationship to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And, you know, I feel like I'm really blessed. I get to work with a warden at Kern Valley that, and I will say it this way, when you align in your approach and your philosophy and how you think the institution should be run, it makes a world of difference. And I'm lucky and fortunate that the warden and I see eye to eye on most everything. Does that mean we never disagree? Absolutely, we disagree sometimes. and we'll sit and chat about, okay, well, what's the next step that we need to take, and let's make sure that what's the best plan moving forward. So, but overall, I have a great warden I get to work with, and that makes my role and his role much easier. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later as we kind of get into some other components of this discussion.
So, Michael, before we move on, I just want to remind our audience members tonight, we really want a lot of engagement from you. So if you have questions or you have comments, please share them in the chat. And especially questions. Ask Michael any question that you might have. Like I said before, we have folks on deck who are going to send the questions over to them, and hopefully we'll get them answered before our 6:30 mark. So, Michael, I want to take a little step back. You know,
Sure.
Being unfamiliar with Kern Valley, can you walk us through where it's located?
Yes, that's a great question, because Kern Valley is located in a great place that I would say is, you know, a lot of folks socially speaking and in communities in general, a lot of people, you know, they don't necessarily want a prison in their backyard. That's not always the case, but Kern Valley is located a little north of Bakersfield and south of Fresno. And so I've kind of highlighted on the map there where level 4 max security prison, we got about 3,600 guys there. And so we're kind of out in the middle of, there's not a whole lot around, which is fine, but that's where we're located. So if you're kind of wondering where we're located, for the folks on the call, we're a little north of Bakersfield.
And I'm sure, Michael, you're not original to the area. You're from LA.
Yeah, I'm from LA. I'm from Lower Alabama. And I'm not. I spent really, I've been in California since 1991 when I originally came out here by way of the Air Force. So I really have been out here longer than I did growing up in Alabama. So I kind of consider myself as much Californian as I do Alabamian.
Yeah, Michael, I grew up pretty much half of my life in India. So I lived in India just before I turned 10, and I moved out here. But, you know, when people say, where are you from? I say, the Bay Area. I've lived in the Bay Area pretty much ever since. So it feels like home, and the thought about moving away from the Bay just doesn't seem right. So let's talk a little bit about Kern Valley State Prison. I want to hear what are the services that you're providing to the inmate population, and tell us what the population is like.
Well, here's what I like to share with folks who are not working within the correctional setting when it comes to healthcare delivery. I like to kind of boil it down and try to simplify it. I said, my patients don't drive up in their car, get out of their car, come into the lobby, pay a copay and have a seat and walk back and get their vitals done and see the doctor. That's not our environment. It's nothing like that per se. But we do deliver medical care, primary care. There's a host of range of specialties that we do primarily through a telemed kind of venue. We do quite a bit on site with dental, and we have a very robust mental health services delivery system. Kern Valley does not have a huge mental health program as compared to some other institutions, but we do have a mental health program there. So we deliver healthcare in those particular 3 areas, and we do even sometimes do a few other minor procedures on site, but primary care, dental, some specialty care on site, very limited, but a lot through telemed, and then dental and mental health services. And this is done in a max security prison. What you're kind of confronted with is the transportation of our inmate patients to and from their housing unit is all done under custody control, and there's always at least 2 officers to 1 inmate when they're transporting guys. And there's a lot of security and safety features that they have built into their protocols when they move a guy. And which guys can go into a what they call a holding cell waiting to be seen, so kind of like a lobby or a waiting room. Mm-hmm. There are certain guys that can't be mixed with other inmate patients. You've got a lot of kind of factors to consider in the custody side to keep both inmates safe and staff safe. And they sort all that out, and they do a phenomenal job at Kern Valley. Our custody counterparts do a phenomenal job of making sure folks are separated. So there's, I mean, let's face it, a max security prison is just that for a reason.
Right.
And so there's a lot of safety components that we follow to make sure staff and the inmate patients are safe.
So Michael, you know, you talked about, you know, working in a max security prison, so I'm sure it's very stressful. Can you tell us how you find joy in your day-to-day activities, or
Yeah, you know, I love what I do, Navi. I absolutely enjoy it. I get to work around a group of professionals. I have a peer group of CEOs I get to work with that I can bounce things off of. I've got tremendous support coming from, you know, my leadership at the regional level, my boss and others, all the way through headquarters. The custody counterparts that I work with at Kern Valley, really truly a group of professionals that are there dedicated to doing a mission. And that's been kind of my career background, is serving in an organization that's mission focused. And so when I kind of keep my life, if you would, kind of how I approach that and think about it, I go, you know, it's my spiritual health and balance, and how am I taking care of myself physically along the way. And I had a prior slide up there. I try to exercise 4 to 5 times a week. You know, sometimes I hit 3 and sometimes I hit 6. It just depends. And then how's my mental health? You know, where am I mentally engaged in what I need to be doing? And at the center of that, of course, is, you know, my kids, who I just, you know, my little daughter, I'll have to admit, okay, she's got daddy wrapped around her finger so tight. It's you know, that's the way it should be, and that's the way it is, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So, but, you know, keeping family at the center of that as well is how I kind of think about it. That's my sight picture. That's my perspective. I think everybody probably comes at it in their own way, which works for them. And this certainly is kind of what I kind of try to keep in balance. The role is the role. And I say, you know, this is what I've signed up for. There's demands that come along with that. And I took the oath back in the 90s when I went into the military, and I said, you know, this is what I signed up for. Whatever comes with it, comes with it. So, but I absolutely love doing what I get to do.
So Michael, we have a lot of good questions from our audience, but before we move on to them, I just want to ask, you talked about creating joy for yourself. To me, being a good leader means creating joy within your team. So in these sort of unexpected and difficult circumstances that we're in today, how do you create joy in your team?
Yeah, great question. You know, what I like to do is look for those opportunities to celebrate small successes and small wins. I'll tell you, we've got out there at Kern Valley across the board, phenomenal leadership team, and they're doing tough work every day. We've got some folks right now in our public health space that are out testing individuals for COVID every day, and we're looking for opportunities to celebrate them. What they're doing for Kern Valley is absolutely remarkable, and they are doing a phenomenal job of helping us manage, detect, and contain the virus within our prison. So, you know, I look for small wins. I look for opportunities to, as I say, you know, I had a general I worked for in the military years and years and years ago, and he says, you know, it was either a lieutenant or a captain. He says, Captain, you know, one day you're going to be the colonel. You can either be the colonel that tears people down because, you know, hey, let's face it, the military had a few of those. He says, or you can be the colonel that builds people up. And you've got to figure out where you want to live in that space. And that's been something I've carried with me forward forever. And I've worked with him probably back in the mid-90s. Still keep in touch with him. And, you know, what kind of CEO do you want to be? Do you want to be the CEO that helps build people up and celebrate the successes? Lord knows, you know, you've got things that come and hit our plate. There's enough opportunity and challenges that come along the way. And I think that our team at Kern Valley does a phenomenal job. So I think, you know, for me, it's looking for that opportunity to celebrate those small successes and wins out there.
Yeah, you know, Michael, I can certainly relate to that. My team is led by a great leader who celebrates small successes. So I have to say, I'm thankful to her, who's always spreading positivity even when we're facing difficult situations. So Michael, I want to take a step back. We have some audience questions, and I want to bring this slide back up because I think it would be a good point of reference. So you talked to us about some of the services that are provided to the population. So the question from the audience is, do you have enough staff to carry out all of the duties that are expected of you?
So the short answer is yes. And let me give you some clarity around that answer. You might get a different answer if you ask a different person. So that's not really this venue here, but I say yes. And we've got the medical department, the dental department, and the nursing department, and mental health. We all have, they've got very robust, and I say robust because I think they're well refined and defined on the staffing models across 35 institutions. And this is not unusual for a large organization. I've seen it nearly in every organization I've worked in. There's some sort of staffing model that says if you've got this number of patients and this type of patient with this kind of stratification, and here's how many folks that you're going to get to deliver that care. And we go through a annual cycle for that, and then we get a release of what we call PY authority around May timeframe, June timeframe. They have a May revise, which comes to the governor's budget. You may look at that and say, well, you know, I think you missed the mark on something. And we go back and relook at that sometimes. But by and large, I think our headquarters folks, along with the institutions, do a great job of identifying the resources that we need to fulfill the mission requirements that we have.
Thank you, Michael. So I think
I don't know if that answered that. Sure, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know if that question has further follow-up to that, but I don't know if I want to go too deep into all the different approaches to our staffing, but by and large, yes. Now, I will tell you that I may have the authority or position authority to hire 20 doctors. Now, can I get 20 doctors to come work in Delano, California is a different issue. Okay, so the hiring of individuals sometimes within a certain area of the state, that becomes a different discussion.
Okay. So Michael, I want to go on to another great question that came from our audience. So the question goes, sometimes the approach to inmates can be polar opposites between healthcare and custody staff. How do you bridge those gaps in approach in a manner that maintains teamwork? So great question.
Yeah, so, well, let me just be really transparent. I don't necessarily wholeheartedly agree with the question in the sense that that is true in that sense. But can it exist sometimes in an institution? Well, yeah, sure it can. And so the way I like to address that, and I'll even speak to this a little bit later, is that, you know, we're all part of the same team. And getting my counterparts to understand the role that the team needs to fulfill or their charter, and how custody is part of that solution is part of the discussion. Because you got to start the discussion. As sometimes as it may be uncomfortable, but you do have to have that discussion. And does that mean that sometimes there's not a different perspective coming at what should be done? Absolutely there is, and that's part of how we work together. My peer colleague is the warden. I reach out to him, talk to him, 4 or 5 times a week on different topics. So things that need to be brought up to his level, I'll bring up. But on the whole, I would say on the whole, that I think our team at Kern Valley has a great working relationship across the board with custody. But when those things do come up, it's, let's have a conversation about each other's respective roles within that team work environment, how to get this mission done.
So Michael, I want to take us back a little bit more for our next question and bring the slide back up because I think it's a good point of reference. So the question is asking, working in the prison system is a challenging environment. What motivates, how do you motivate individuals to work in that environment and be successful? So I think you touched on that a little bit before, so if you could expand on that.
Yeah, and I love this question for a lot of reasons, but namely for this reason. Is what I share, in leadership team meetings we have, is that sometimes leadership role isn't necessarily to motivate people. I think fundamentally that 99% of the people come into our prison environments wanting to do a good job, they desire to be there, they apply for the job, they desire to be there, and they genuinely want to do a good job. I think part of the trick in leadership is, let's make sure that we don't destroy the motivation that people came in with.
Mm-hmm.
See, I'm going to flip that question over and say, I'm assuming you're here because you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that you didn't just end up coming to work in a prison by accident. You had to go through an application process, an interview process, sign a bunch of paperwork, and now you're here. Great, we'd love to have you. Now, it's leadership's role, right? All that work and effort to get into the environment, destroy that motivation. Leadership has to be mindful of that, because in leadership roles, we have a lot of influence over the work lives of people. And so I don't want to kind of skirt around the question, because I think it's a pivotal question. It's important.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that leadership has to be mindful not to destroy any motivation that people have intrinsically when they come in to want to do a good job. And one thing that I firmly believe in leadership roles is that, part of our role in leadership is to remove obstacles and barriers for folks to do their jobs easier and better. That's part of our role. And, we have obstacles and barriers that come up, all the time, but that's part of our role. How do we remove those? How do we make it easier for them to get their job done? And if that's what helps motivate somebody, great. And Navi, the other way I find, if I get that kind of question, I'll just ask somebody, what motivates you? Let's not make it complicated. The only way I'm going to really know is to ask. That's what I'll do.
Well, I'm glad that you're straightforward and to the point. So being straightforward and to the point, I think we talked a little bit about your leadership style. We've touched on that quite a bit. So why don't we jump right in and talk about what are the characteristics in a leader that you look for, and what do you consider to be a good leader?
These are a few things that I put up here on the screen, and this is in no way meant to be an exhaustive list. These are a few bullet points. I'm sure anybody on this line here today, or this conference today, could come up with a different list. But these are a couple of things that I said, here's some things that I thought are relative. And I think integrity for me is key. It's pivotal. A leader has to have that. And people want to know sometimes directly from the leader, what's the real storyline? What's the real message? And that's critical throughout. And, a lot of us in key leadership roles, we know we're always being watched, observed, and what we say. I will tell you that, I get nervous sometimes when I have a staff member come back to me and say, Mr. Felder, 2 months ago, we were in a meeting and you said, and then I hold my breath because, I don't exactly remember what I said 2 months ago, right? But here's what I can say. There are things that I know that I may say. And there are things that I know there's no way I would ever say that. And there are things that I go, yeah, that sounds like what I would say. And so I can kind of bucket into 3 broad categories. And when I ever hear that comment, that I go, no, what you're telling me goes against my values. That's not something I would say. I think we need to have a different conversation, or let me help put some clarity around it. And so I think about it in that context. I doubt if any of us can remember, I certainly can't be the first to admit, a conversation from 2 months ago, 3 months ago. So integrity is huge.
So for those in the audience who may not be, intimately aware of what Michael is referring to, I've experienced this one firsthand just yesterday. In our prep call, I mentioned to Michael, hey, here's an example that you talked about that I think would be good to share with our audience members tomorrow night. And he's like, and he came out and said, I don't think I said that. I think I might have said this, but I don't think I could have said that. So, he practices what he preaches. So I appreciate that about you.
Yeah, and it's, and you do it in any leadership role. And I think in any of our roles, we have to be mindful of not what we say, but the message we're giving out. And we got to think about that. I put on here being humble. I think that comes with a trait of just being really, and I think about it in the context of, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, and you don't always have to have the right answer, and you don't always have to have the solution. It's okay. And I think about that from, it's okay if I throw out something and mention something that, well, that's not the best idea and I'm wrong. And you've got to be comfortable. And I think if my leadership team were on the line here, they would certainly echo that. I'm comfortable with somebody saying, no, I don't think that's the best approach. We should do this. Great. What's the solution that's going to get the best outcome? I want to mention a little bit about authenticity.
Michael, I think it takes a lot of courage as a leader to say, hey, I don't know everything, or I don't know all of the answers, but I have a great team who are experts in their field. Let's bring them together and compile the best solution to what we're looking at.
We do quite a bit of, when we have key critical decisions to make, I bring it to the team, or someone from the team will bring it into that venue so that we can discuss it and really try to have some good, safe, if I could say that, very safe discussions in a way that's respectful. And I think our team does that very well at Kern Valley. I want to mention something about, that kind of comes into, some moral courage, but I'm not going to hit on that, but authenticity, because I went to I worked at a prison up in Sacramento, and I have to tell you this little story here, because it's kind of, so I was coming in behind another CEO who was, I don't know how else to say it, but she was just a rock star. And I knew what I was walking into. I knew her reputation. I knew what she brings to the table. And I thought, I don't know if I really want to go there. I got big shoes to fill. And I had several people come up to me, well, this is what she did. This is what she did. And I go, well, that's great. I may do that. I may not. And the reason I bring that relative to the authenticity, because folks were wanting to see that I emulated or did what she did. And I thought, that would be phony, and it would quickly come out that that's just not authentic. And I remember sharing with the team, I'm not her. I'm not going to try to be her, but I do want to be the best version of me. And that's how I'm going to approach this. And so I had to kind of put that out there in a way that says, let's knock that off. I know she built a legacy, big shoes to fill. Great. I'm going to learn a lot from her, but I'm not her. And I think that when you start talking about being authentic in the work environment and just kind of quote unquote, if I can use this kind of, be real, then that's critical in your leadership roles and in whatever work environment you're in.
So Michael, I want to talk a little bit about what has it been like for you to step out of your comfort zone and take chances and sort of the trajectory of your career. So walk us through, when did you first step out of your comfort zone? What were some of the steps that you took in your career that you thought, I don't know if this will work out, but in the long run, you found it to be beneficial?
Yeah, so when comfort zone can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And, when you ask about when have I stepped out of my comfort zone, I seek for those opportunities to step outside my comfort zone. And when I kind of think about that in the broader context, I mean, going right into the Air Force out of college and signing up and not knowing where I'm going to go, ironically, I don't recall at all ever having anxiety or having second thoughts about that decision, but yet it was completely outside of my comfort zone from the perspective of what I knew, my environment, where I grew up, and what I knew, which was a pretty small, kind of circle in that sense. And I'll tell you, I was working in an organization years ago, and we had a new VP come in. Did a lot of changes on short notice, and a lot of changes were good, and a lot of changes weren't so good, and a lot of folks were nervous. And I remember him popping into my office, and he says, "Felder, I'll get to you in a few weeks." I've heard about you. You're fine. And that was about it, you know, but other people didn't enjoy that kind of warm reception, if you want to call that warm. And when I met with him a few weeks later, I remember sharing with him, he was a phenomenal leader. I said, you know, I've got more bandwidth. I can do more for the organization. You know, let's look at some things. He goes, oh, I'm going to let you get outside your comfort zone. I said, I'd love it. And picked up a couple of more units within that area, you know, within the organization, had a lot of fun with it, did a lot of great work. So, you know, I think you have to look for opportunities to get outside your comfort zone. Coming into correctional health care was not something, you know, I had a very good friend of mine who's really one of my coaches and mentors recommended it to me many years ago. And my first reaction was, I don't think that's for me. And he goes, no, you really need to look into this. You should really look into this, you know, and here's why. And I did. And it, you know, after about a 6 or 8 months kind of discussion with the department, I joined the department. And so that was a big step outside my comfort zone. Didn't really know what I was, you know, signing up for.
You know, sometimes, Michael, looking back at my my career and looking back at my life, I think about some of the chances I took that really led me to meeting some of the most wonderful people I know today, or living through some of the best experiences I've experienced thus far. So sometimes it's a little scary to say, I don't really know how this is going to work out, but then going in with a positive mentality and a positive outlook to say, I'm going to make the best of this experience. So Michael, we're at just a halfway mark, so I want to remind you all to keep the questions going. I'm seeing them come through. These are great questions. We have some time reserved at the very end to get them all answered if we can't pepper them in. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and the response to COVID-19. So share with us, Michael, what were some of the decisions that you made or the organization made early on that helped you and the organization combat the spread? How did you keep the providers, the inmates, the guards, the administrators, and the overall staff safe?
Hey, you know, that's a great question, and I'm really, I want to kind of spend some time on this here. And I put this slide together, and if you can just hold this slide up here for just a moment here, because I asked, you know, what is your risk tolerance? And, you know, I used to fly, you heard that earlier. And what I would offer up to this audience is that the 2 planes, the Thunderbirds in the upper left doing a knife edge pass at a closure rate of about 1,000 miles per hour have less risk than this jumbo jet coming in for what looks to be an eventful landing.
Michael, you know, I've flown with Ryanair quite a lot, so it does, being inside of Ryanair feels quite that way.
Oh, sorry to hear that. So, you know, here's what I would, so when I kind of think about, you know, what's your risk tolerance? And how Kern Valley approached this, and I think at the larger sense our department approached this as well. And because there's a lot of kind of approaches or ways to kind of shape this discussion, but I think the risk tolerance piece becomes, well, where are you in that risk scale? And I come back to the conversations that I had with the warden. This is where that relationship piece became or is absolutely critical. He and I couldn't have been more aligned on the level of risk that we were willing to accept. Because we both said, if this comes in and we have a massive outbreak inside a max security prison, we don't have enough empty cells to isolate every guy. Okay, we would have to get creative on how that works. And we're still, to this day, we're monitoring that closely. And so what's the level of risk? We've had several discussions internally around, yeah, we can do that, but how much risk are we assuming if we go down path A versus path B? And you have to have that discussion because I think it is about risk, because you're dealing with somewhat of unknown outcomes in some sense. And so I like to use a lot of aviation flying metaphors and analogies here, because the Thunderbird pilot's doing the knife edge pass, I'd say that's pretty minimal risk. And the reason is that's so precisely calculated that they know exactly what they're going to do at a closure rate of 1,000 miles an hour. The guy on the pilot on the bottom right of the screen, my screen, I don't know what that pilot was thinking. It looked to me like it was worthy of a go around. But so how are we going to approach the risk? And so that alignment with the warden was really pivotal in how we approached what we were going to do at Kern Valley.
Mm-hmm. So Michael, talk to us a little bit about what were some of the challenges being in a prison system. What were your unique challenges that someone outside of the prison system wouldn't necessarily have to deal with?
Well, again, another aviation kind of picture here, and I kind of like to reference this for a reason, because I go, you know, when we're dealing with this, and every organization has had to do this, Navi, at some level. You know, our correctional healthcare systems has done it in what fits for them, and all the other big healthcare systems have had to do the same thing of what fits for them and what their factors are that they need to consider. But I use this image here to say, you know, an organization really needs to know where they are. Where are you now? Mm-hmm. Where are you today? And that becomes, and I use this image here because I go, a pilot needs to know where he is or she is. I need to know that. Where are you relative? And then where are you going? You got to have an idea of where you're going. What heading are you going to go down? And then, you know, the last thing is, how are you going to get there? There's a lot of ways of which you can go about managing to any pandemic or any crisis. There are a multitude of ways. There's probably a multitude of as many people as you can get opinions from. But we needed to have some discussion about how we were going to do it. And our headquarters, I think, did super excited about how well our headquarters, they put an ICP, an incident command post in place. I don't even remember when, I think around March, April. And the communication flow, although was heavy and frequent, you certainly could not say the communication was lacking. And I think in a crisis, you have to over-communicate. You have to. There's just too much going on. So where are you? Where are you going? How are you going to get there? And I kind of use those questions to go, because we had to figure that out at Kern Valley. Mm-hmm.
So Michael, talking about communication, the one example I can kind of share with the audience that I've experienced recently is the California fires and the communication through CAHL Fire. They've done a tremendous job of keeping us who are kind of near the fires, on the borderline. We're, you know, constantly checking the messaging around what's the containment percentage like, where are the evacuation warnings, where are the orders. So it's been really helpful to get those constant updates, and about, you know, 2 days into looking at those updates, you kind of know, okay, every so many hours I'm going to hear this type of information, so I can look out for that, and it gives you a little bit of reassurance. So Michael, I want to tie this in for our audience. So we talked about risk tolerance, and that serving as your framework, and then the level of awareness that we talked about just now with this picture. So talk to us about, how did you bring that all together? We know that this is a level of risk tolerance we're willing to have. This is our situation, and we're aware of that. Tell us how you came about to make those decisions.
So we can go back to that other slide there real quick here. I just want to hit that really quickly. Some of the challenges that are unique, what I would say unique at least, is, in my opinion, unique to a correctional setting. We've got congregate housing, the movement of inmate patients. I'm just going to hit these real quick, but I want to kind of highlight them. Isolation and quarantine, identification, containment, and management of a patient with the virus. So let's just kind of keep going, because I'll weave that in as we talk about this. These are some of the key decisions that I think were made early on around what our department needed to do that were actually pivotal in kind of how we were able to manage the crisis and respond to it. They stood up a joint incident command post, and I say joint, and that's critical. And you know, you don't know that not everybody knows the department, but that's co-led by a healthcare representative and someone from custody. Okay, and that's critical. We had a co-incident commander. That model is replicated down at the institutional level. Again, critical. Our department was out making decisions sometimes before guidance from CDC was even out there. So I think our department, we've got some just brilliant physicians at headquarters in public health and infectious disease. They were saying, no, we should do these things. Closed visiting, suspended intake, figured out how we were going to do isolation and quarantine. This telework and hiring, the department, we immediately went to kind of a telework kind of approach, and I don't even know how many thousands of people continue to do telework, and some folks, I saw at least 1 or 2 people from our department on the line. A year ago, if we had a conversation about telework, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. Today, we figured out how to make it work, and out of necessity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because I kind of have a whole people approach and strategy to how I lead. And I think that's critical at this time when, as I say, when your staff member has little Susie and little Johnny at home because they're not in school, you've got to figure out how to make that work. Telework is one option that we've leveraged, and I think has been able to work for a lot of our team members, and I'm proud to say that we've been able to support them, because that's tough. And we've got a number of single parents out there. That's kind of a tough thing, and you can't, the days of grandma and grandpa coming to take care of little Johnny and little Susie, well, there's a risk in that too now. And so that's been another component that folks said, hey, my grandparents are high risk. So there's been a whole shift in our society about how we work. So yeah, I think the hiring and our HR folks, and along with other executives in our department, took hiring from what may be a 3 to 4 month process and compressed that down to sometimes 2 to 3 weeks, and to effectively get folks in the door and get them integrated and onboarded so that they could start helping out delivering care. Again, a year ago would have been tough to do, but I tell you, when this organization has a mission to step up to, and we've got to get it done, they execute and do it well.
Well, that's really great to hear, Michael. So let's bring it home for our audience members and talk about sort of the comprehensive response to COVID-19.
Yes, so thank you, Navi. So one of the things is, one of the approaches I've had, and I do a conference calls every Friday, all staff conference calls every Friday. And so that communication, you've got to communicate up the organization. Keep your senior executives involved and informed of what you're doing at the institutional level. And that doesn't mean overload your boss's inbox with every little thing, but you got to know what things are that you need to communicate up and what things you don't. I'm fortunate I've got a phenomenal guy I get to work with every day, and other executives. So communication down the organization, and that's working with the team and making sure the information that's coming out either from headquarters or what we decide locally is being cascaded through the organization and making sure that we're executing. And that becomes a little bit more of a challenge to me sometimes. You've got folks out on the front lines, they're doing their jobs day to day. A lot of our, roles like mine are a little bit more, we're more behind the desk and in meetings. But staff out there are not able to sit behind a desk. They're in delivering patient care. And so there's a lot of communication that needs to be delivered verbally, in huddles that we kind of modified our huddles as well too. But to make sure that a communication is rolling down, and I think that at least Kern Valley has done a phenomenal job, and communicate horizontally across the organization as well. And that means I'm constantly reaching out to my warden and deputy warden on a host of different topics to make sure that they're aware of what's either coming or what's being asked of us that I'm going to need their support on. But I put this little diagram together, Navi, just kind of as a talking point. There's a lot of ways you could kind of shape this, but I put in there setting the tone in the relationship as that's that piece about the warden, and really, being able to pick up the phone and go, hey, warden, we got an issue here we need to work on, and I need your help on it. And that happens. I talk to him, 3 to 5 times a week, and it's pretty fluid. And having that relationship and setting the tone, and I mean by setting the tone is, that comes back to that risk tolerance. that we were, that we jointly had many discussions on back in March about what's our risk tolerance. I want to talk a little bit about battle rhythm, because that's the military kind of terminology, I guess, for tempo, right? Meetings every morning at 7:30 and 8, meetings with our headquarters every day at 2 o'clock, although that's been modified slightly here recently. So constant communication flow is what really that's about, and keeping folks informed. And so that battle rhythm, that tempo, has been kind of certainly been escalated since, you know, March timeframe.
So Michael, talk to us a little bit about how has that tempo changed from January, February, going into the peak in March. Now we're 6 months into COVID season, unfortunately, and going into the flu season next. How has that changed? What were the peaks and what were the valleys?
So the peaks, you know, I think a lot of people in our department, and probably everybody in healthcare, a lot of ways, is going to say, you know, I've been at this escalated level of tempo now since March. And if you were to kind of figuratively speaking, say you've been up here and you were historically here, you've probably come down a little bit. Or have we adjusted to the new normal? Have we adjusted to a new normal? And I think there's some of us, at least some organizations, that have adjusted to that new normal, that this is a new tempo here. And I think we're going to be at this new tempo until we get some more kind of assurance of kind of how this is going to unfold moving forward. And so you asked about kind of peaks and valleys, and I'll be honest, I'm super proud of our team at Kern Valley. I could sit and brag about them all night long. But one of the things that we were really keeping a pulse on back March, April, May, and we still do, what are those community rates for the 2 primary counties that our staff live in? What was happening in that? Kern County, Tulare County. We were looking at that every day. And at some point, I want to say around end of June, because we were starting to have a few staff show up positive, either through outside providers or through our own internal testing, which we implemented, the whole department implemented, was, and in the midst of this, we were doing what we called surveillance testing, which was kind of a baseline of high-risk patients. And that worked beautifully well, because none of our high-risk patients contracted COVID. So it was designed to do exactly what we wanted it to do, which was identify if any of those had that. But here's the piece that I remember us, the leadership team, sitting around discussing, and I said, you know, we've got community infection rates that are starting to really go up. Everybody that works here lives in these communities. You know, the hypothesis was, we've probably got a patient or two that's been infected and we just don't know. That was part of the discussion. Go ahead.
I'm curious to know, so if that was the hypothesis, was there testing around that hypothesis to prove it either true or false?
When you say testing, I'm not really sure how I can answer that piece of it. You know, so maybe you can kind of want to rephrase it, or I'm not really sure. If you're talking about kind of like a statistical model where you test the hypothesis, I'm going to say no. There was no testing we did to prove that. It was more of a, does it make sense and does it line up? You know, does it make sense? I mean,
So my question was really around, you know, if we're seeing the rates for those in positive in the community go up, does it make sense at that time to start testing the population inside the system?
Oh, yes. And that's exactly what we did. I remember having, we had a lot of discussions internally. You know, somebody, you know, I forget how the conversation went in detail, but it was, should we test everybody in our, you know, all of our inmate patients, all 3,600? And there were some different perspectives on that. Why should we? We're already testing a baseline. To no, because we don't really have a lot of people that we've come up with that are positive in our staff, and we've been able to identify them, and they're not coming in. And so there was a lot of different perspectives, and they were all what I would say valid, good perspectives to have. But, I'm going to bring us back to how much risk do we want to take? Because if you assume that you probably have a patient or two inside your prison because you had some staff come in that are infected, there's a high probability that that's been passed on.
Correct. So Michael, I want to be mindful of our timing, and
I know.
want to get to some more audience questions. So let's still talk a little bit about the surveillance, the community rates, and then wrap up here. Okay.
It sounds like you're giving me the 2-minute warning, which sounds good, right? So our so let me just kind of give you the quick down and dirty. We did full testing in July. We did a cycle of full testing. Patients still have a right to refuse a test. I think we tested around 3,000, 3,100 in July. We identified 6 guys that were positive. 6. So I think that's a huge win, because had we not identified those, surely they would have infected more people. Okay, so I thought that was a huge win for us. We were able to identify them, contain them, and manage that. We did another round in August. Again, we found another 6. And so far to date, we've had 12 guys come up positive. And I think that's from that first initial testing round, and then the subsequent round in August has enabled us to identify the guys that are positive and take immediate prompt action on how to manage it.
So Michael, we have a lot of good questions from our audience members. So let's go through a couple of them. The first one being, clinical independence is an essential component of good healthcare and healthcare professionalism, particularly in correctional settings. Is there a lot of challenge in balancing budgets and providing quality, accessible care? Is most care in-house? There's a couple other pieces to this question, so let's discuss, is it a challenge to balance budgets and provide quality, accessible care?
So in my years of experience, I think that's a question that's really applicable to any healthcare organization that reaches far beyond our department. To me, let me reframe that question. It's a resource management question. And the question becomes, so to answer the question, you have to be mindful of a budget. Every organization has a budget that we have to manage to. And so, but most of the care happens internally, inside what we call inside the wire, inside the prison. Most care is delivered there. What we call higher level of care, folks who need to go out to an inpatient or go into a hospital or go to an emergency visit, because we have to send guys out because we do have emergencies inside the prison, will go out to a hospital. Most of our care is delivered within the wire, though. There are other parts of that question there, Navi. I don't know if I did.
Well, you hit them all. So the other questions were about, when do you ship out care, and what is the transportation like, and the coordination in transportation. But I think we have a few more good questions that I want to get to. The next one is around the relation between the VA and the California Prison Health System. So the question goes, we here at the VA used to have compensation and pension physicians to go out to the prisons to conduct exams for service connected ratings. Is that still a viable option there at Kern Valley Prison? So I hope that question was clear. If not, I can reread. No,
I understand. Yeah, no, I get it. I'm familiar with that. There was an assembly bill, I think it was passed a few years ago, and that was a partnership that we did with CalVet. Okay, and I want to distinguish between CalVet, I think it's with CalVet, and I don't have the agreement in front of me by any means, but CalVet is a state agency versus the Veterans Administration, which is federal. CalVet, I think what the question really is speaking to is, does CalVet still allowed to come on to prisons and do a compensation determination or a disability evaluation for a veteran? And right now, we've ceased a lot of activity of folks from outside coming in, okay, just because of COVID. But as my understanding is that relationship and contract is still in place. But right now we've ceased a lot of different activities of folks coming inside the prison. And so if the question is driving at something a little bit more in particular, then there's a lot of things we've curtailed to contain or manage and keep the virus from coming in.
Gotcha. And you talked about eliminating visits as well to help with containing the spread as well.
Visiting?
So I want to take.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So I want to take us back to this slide because I think it's a good slide to have up while we go over the next question. So the question is, what is the most prevalent health issue or illness that you and your staff deal with in a mass security institution, and how is COVID-19 impacting this issue? And for the rest of the audience, Michael, if you can talk a little bit about mental health as well in
Sure.
your response.
So just read that question again real quick, Navi, if you would.
Sure. So the question is, what is the most prevalent health issue or illness that you and your staff deal with in a max security institution, and how has COVID-19 impacted that issue? And I've expanded on this question to have you address mental health in here as well.
So to be really transparent, to say what our most prevalent health issue is probably, let me just put it this way, our dashboard that we use to look at health indicators has, I think, around between top line metrics and subordinate metrics, I think it has around 300 data points. Okay, so I don't know that I would want to try to bucket what's most prevalent in that sense. We do have, our guys do have health issues, and that can range from, high blood pressure, hemoglobin A1C that's high, or obesity. And I'm not saying those are specific to Kern Valley, but there's a host of measures that we look at internally from our dashboard perspective to say, okay, here's what's going on with this segment of the population internal to each prison. And I'll just say that our dashboard that we have in this department is one of the best dashboards I've ever seen in any organization. It's built on a SQL Server platform, and we can drill into literally actionable data at our fingertips. From Kern Valley perspective, I just saw something flash up on my screen here. We started a program here earlier this year that was initiated and rolled out. It's called, we call it Integrated Substance Use Disorder Treatment. You've probably heard it. So guys that are on opioid addiction, we've rolled that out this year here at Kern Valley. We have about 800 patients right now that are enrolled in that. It's voluntary, and it's quite a large component of our healthcare delivery. And we're still, I'd say, maturing that program as we bring more providers up to a level of certification and training that can deliver that level of care. So that's one piece of it. I think you asked about mental health.
Yeah.
So our mental health delivery system is got a multi-tier model from an inpatient side of it, and we have inpatient beds at Kern Valley. You have outpatient services as well for mental health. Each one of those different tiers have a different level of service that comes with it. Guys who they can ask to be enrolled, they can see their doctor and get a referral. So our mental health program here is not as, we've got some institutions with very large mental health missions attached to them. I would not say that Kern Valley has a huge, large mental health mission. I'd say it's more medium-sized to smaller.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question though.
No, that answers my question. So thank you, Michael. So I'm gonna go on to the next question here. So the next question is, contracting has been growing over the past few decades. What do you think about privatization, and how do you think it's moving the bar in healthcare? What role can leadership play in bridging those gaps?
Can you repeat the first part of that question?
Sure. Contracting has been growing over the past few decades. What do you think about privatization, and how do you think it's moving the bar in healthcare? And then the second portion is, what role can leadership play in bridging those gaps?
I'm going to answer this question, not necessarily about how that can work with a state government or a federal government or any other, segment within the healthcare. I think that any organization that's looking to partner with someone for their healthcare delivery needs to go through a very thorough assessment of the request, figure out what they want them to do, and then partner closely with them as they go through. You've got RFP processes to go through and vetting processes to go through. And so there is a space for that. I've worked in private sector. We had vendor relationships. That was one of the pieces that I managed. We had over 22 vendors across the state. It worked well. To say that no, healthcare should all be done organically, I don't know if that's really, I think each situation needs to be assessed on its own merits. And I wouldn't say that that's where we should go or where we shouldn't go. Every organization needs to look at that and say, is this the right fit for us and the right thing for our organization?
So, Michael, those
really...
that are not familiar. Yeah, so let me ask you, for those who may not be familiar with vendor management, how does alignment of mission and values go into that type of assessment? The assessment to say, we are going to partner and do work together, but our mission and our values and our vision align at the same time.
So let me kind of clarify the role at the institutional level, which is more operationally driven. When you get into kind of that question around value alignment and a contract, for instance, maybe that our department is looking to have through another healthcare organization in private sector, that's done at headquarters through our contracting folks. Very seldom would our those at the operational level really be pulled into that space in our department. But so I don't want to kind of mislead the audience here, because I'll answer the question in a generic way, but not really what we do here, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Can I do that? Okay.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about value alignment of an organization and mission alignment, I think it is critical that that's assessed and looked at. Does it mean that there must be a perfect alignment? No, but I do believe that you want to assess that to see if it's the right fit.
Right. We have a ton of other questions from the audience, so I want to make sure that in our time together we get to those. So the next question, Michael, is around leadership and addressing issues that we are facing today. So the question is, what have you done as a leader to look at the issues like systematic racism and other similar concerns? So this is for you, Michael, in particular to your leadership. Repeat
that question.
Sure.
It's about systematic racism. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Kind of
So what have you done as a leader to look at issues like systematic racism and other similar concerns?
Let me see if I can kind of cast this response in a way that resonates with this audience, and because I don't really think there's too many people on here that I've worked closely with. I think the folks who've worked closely with me would know that my tolerance level for anything like that in the organization I'm in is absolutely zero. I don't know how else to kind of answer that question. But as to, there's plenty of laws on the books out there, right, to address that and to make sure that we're compliant with that and make sure folks are educated on that. And if we see something that's inappropriate, to address that. But I don't have, my personal position on that, my approach to that is that there's zero tolerance for that. And that's, the question is specific to racism, but, I think that's a question that's really a little bit broader reaching than just that. And it's how do we treat people with dignity and respect, irrespective of who they are and where they come from. And so, you know, this is a question that probably deserves another whole session.
Correct.
So, you know, but yeah, I don't want to try to go too deep into that. I think there's a lot to be said around that.
Well, you know, we're glad to hear, Michael, that you have zero tolerance policy around that. So I want to go dive a little bit deeper into your leadership style. So the next question is, being that you're from a military background, how does the leadership style and the culture in the military compare to corrections?
Well, I think that there's the question in of itself appears to sound like there's an inherent kind of bias about what leadership looks like in the military. So let me just kind of be transparent. And what I mean by that is that and I've heard this my whole life, I don't want to go in the military because I don't want people telling me what to do. Isn't that, that's nice. Tell me how that works in corporate. Tell me exactly how that works in your company, wherever you work. It doesn't matter if you're in a state, federal, or private sector organization. Kind of tell me how that works. And my experience in the military was really not like that. It was very collaborative. Most of my years in the military were in the healthcare segment. And so it was a very collaborative, all-inclusive, let's really look at this. That doesn't mean that we didn't have the commander say, here are my priorities and here's how we're going to get stuff, you know, here's what we're going to do and here's the priorities of the organization. That's not what I'm saying. That doesn't mean that what we used to say when the balloon goes up or when we had to deploy, that folks know that that's the time to really, this isn't the time where we're going to have a dialogue about whether or not we get on the plane to deploy. That's not how that works. And we all understand that. So, you know, that kind of impression of how the military really works, at least my experience in the Air Force, and with that leadership style that I bring with it from my years in the Air Force and in private sector, I'd say my approach is collaborative. I like to have fun. You know, I think that, you know, you have to bring people into the conversation, and there's ways to do that, and make sure the right people at the table. So I just want to be careful about trying to paint a picture of military, kind of how that is run and orchestrated versus civilian sector. To me, there's a lot of similarities, and irrespective of what kind of private or state or federal government organization you're in. At least my experience in the Air Force was not one that I'm constantly being told what to do. That was not my experience. So I hope that answers that question a little bit.
Yes, and before we go on to the next question, I do want to apologize for misspeaking earlier. I think I mentioned systematic instead of systemic, so I do apologize to the person in our audience who asked that question.
Okay.
So in our last about 6 minutes, Michael, we want to go over just a few more questions. You talked about substance use disorder earlier. So the question from the audience is substance use disorder the most prevalent disease? And I know you mentioned that there isn't a way to rank what's the most prevalent illness or disease that your patient population is facing, but is it prevalent in your population?
I would say that Kern Valley certainly has a disproportionate number of patients who have asked to be evaluated for substance use disorder treatment. And some of those patients are yet to see the physician to go through a full evaluation, and we're still in the process of that. So is it the most prevalent? No, but is it a serious issue that we're addressing within our system as a whole within the department? Yes, it is. And I think the department has done a phenomenal job. I want to go back really quickly to your question about systemic racism. I think the best way that any of us can combat that is model the way. That's the best thing you can do. Because that's really what it's going to take, I think, for us to kind of move forward through that. But again, I think that's another whole session, Navi, that I think maybe CAHL wants to look at and consider moving forward, but certainly not really what we're going to cover in the few minutes we have remaining.
Yeah, so speaking of few minutes, and I do completely agree. I think this is it's a great topic to cover, and definitely something I'll probably be looking to add to our backlog. So in the last few minutes together, Michael, I'd like to hear about what were your biggest learnings thus far being with the California prison system. And we got a question about careers in the system. So maybe in the last 2 to 3 minutes, if you can talk about career opportunities and some of the lessons you've learned.
When I think about some of the lessons I've learned, I will kind of frame that out in a way to say, I think most people in healthcare, if you came into our system, would probably be surprised about exactly what we do. And so I've learned so much about how our correctional healthcare system works, and just, kind of a global sense. And I would have never even thought that such, kind of the operation existed like it does within the prison environment. And I can't answer that question, Navi, without, really mentioning the leadership in this organization at the executive level and the folks that I get to work with every day. Absolute professionals, committed to doing a tough mission. I don't want to misguide anybody. And I've said this to folks too that have come in. Working in a prison is not for everybody. It's not, and that's okay. There's no judgment in that. Is that I've seen a couple of times people have hired to come work in a prison. They come in and they go, "It's not for me. It's just not for them." That's okay. I get it. But overall, we've got a dedicated group of professionals across this organization committed to doing a pretty tough mission.
So Michael, thank you so much for volunteering your time to be with us tonight. Your knowledge, especially around, the lesson around risk tolerance and serving as a framework for decision making is really going to stay with me. So for those in the audience, I ask you to think about, what is your number one takeaway from the discussion tonight? Think about it for a few seconds, and once you have it, drop it in the chat for us. So with that, I'm going to thank Michael one more time and thank our audience for being here with us. I'm going to go ahead and pass it. Michael, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Navi. You've done a phenomenal job of moderating, and thank you to everybody who decided to jump in and ask really great questions. They've given me things to think about as well, and I can't thank the audience enough for that. I see some familiar faces on here from my own department. Appreciate my teammates jumping in and supporting me, so thank you. Appreciate it. I have to tell you a quick story before I've got probably 30 seconds. So when I pushed this out on LinkedIn the other day, my boss picked up that push, and then he decided to share it across our organization. And so, I was joking with him, and I said, the most I can talk in front of 2,000 people. I'm comfortable with that. Put me in front of my peer group, and now it's a whole different mix. And I know some of my peers on here, and I want to thank them personally, and thank the entire audience for jumping in. And thank you, Navi, for being such a phenomenal moderator.
Thank you, Michael. With that, I'll turn it back over to Sachin. Sachin, I think you're still on mute.
So much for practice. All right. Thank you, Navi. Thank you, Michael, for your service, first and foremost, and for your time this evening, for sharing your experiences and your leadership style. Learning about the operations at a prison system is definitely an eye-opener. We've had a conversation before a year or two ago, but it's definitely, I'm sure a lot of people agree that they didn't get to the bottom of what it means to be there. And I also realized that communication and collaboration have been your keys to your success all through your career. And I cannot understate it anymore in terms of managing the COVID crisis as well. And if anything, we have to take it from this session. I hope that every organization takes this to the heart to actually contain this virus. Thank you so much again. A couple of quick reminders. Remember to self-report the 1.5 qualified education credits. Make sure you get them for your FACHI credentials. And thank you again for our platinum sponsors, UCSF, Guernsey Academy, University of Phoenix, CAHL Healthcare for your support during these virtual sessions. The post-event survey will be mailed to you. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. I look forward to seeing you all on September 24th for the CAHL's annual awards. For just this one time, we asked to bring your own wine, but I promise it will still be exciting. Thanks again, and good night, everyone.